When we read Genesis chapter 22, most people marvel at Abraham's faith. A father willing to offer his only son. Yes, that is deeply moving. But what truly shook me was another silent figure, Isaac. Genesis 22 records, God commanded Abraham to offer Isaac as a burnt offering. Although the Bible doesn't specify Isaac's exact age at that time, based on rabbinical traditions and scholarly analysis, as well as clues like him carrying the wood up the mountain, Isaac was likely around 30 years old. A 30-year-old man is not naive. He obeyed his father's arrangement, carried the wood up the mountain, and allowed himself to be bound and placed on the altar. At that moment, Isaac must have known what was about to happen, yet he didn't utter a word of resistance. Every time I read this part, I feel a kind of unspeakable heaviness. I can almost see Isaac's lowered eyes in silence under the cold glint of the knife. There was no fear or resentment in those eyes, only a quiet surrender. In that moment, Isaac was not a forced sacrifice, but a willing participant in obedience. We are so used to viewing faith as the father's responsibility that we overlook the son's surrender. Isaac's silence wasn't weakness, it was the courage of absolute trust. He trusted his father, and trusted God even more. From Isaac, we see three essential traits. First, depth and quietness. Isaac didn't speak with God repeatedly like Abraham. He didn't experience the dramatic life swings like Jacob. He seemed like the in-between figure. Not many words, not flashy actions, yet in key moments, he revealed tremendous inner strength. The silence when he was laid on the altar was a shout of faith echoing across heaven and earth. Did you hear it? He quietly obeyed under God's call and his father's command, silent yet powerful in the offering. He wasn't a dramatic warrior of faith, but a submissive sacrifice. This completely challenges our usual idea of spiritual heroes. We often think God only uses bold and passionate people. But Isaac reminds us, God values those who are willing to be laid down, even if their life seems plain. To become a burnt offering in God's hands is glory enough. Second, obedient and resilient. Isaac's nature resembled Jesus, gentle, obedient, and quiet like a lamb. His submission wasn't weakness, it was trust. He grew up hearing his father's stories about God, the one who gave life to the barren. He knew God's promise was upon him. Obeying his father was obeying God's plan. He chose to trust, even when the end seemed like death. Third, a fulfiller through passivity. Isaac didn't drive history forward, he carried it. His role was not to do something, but to be something, the foreshadow of Christ, the one who obeys to the end. It was because he lay on that altar that God revealed his name, Yahweh Yireh. Genesis chapter 22 verse 14, and Abraham called the name of the place, Yahweh Yireh, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Why did God choose Isaac to be the one offered? If God simply wanted to test Abraham, why not choose another way? Why focus on something so extreme and weighty as offering a son? Because this wasn't just a test of Abraham's faith, it was a revelation of Isaac's relationship with God. On that mountain, Isaac fulfilled something no one else could. He became a foreshadow of Jesus Christ. He willingly carried the wood, just as Jesus carried the cross. He uttered not a word in resistance, just as the Lord was silently led to slaughter. See Isaiah chapter 53 verse 7. He trusted his Father's decision, just as Christ obeyed the Father unto death. We can hardly imagine a human who, before the body is even crucified, can lay the soul fully upon the altar. This was not by natural strength, but by the obedience that comes from heavenly love. The life Isaac lived on Mount Moriah was not human nobility, but a kind of profound oneness between the offered and God. What can we learn from Isaac? In an age obsessed with self-fulfillment and control over destiny, who is willing to be the one laid down? who is willing to be quiet, obedient, even hidden among the crowd, just to fulfill the Father's will. God doesn't call all of us to be Abraham, but He often calls us to be like Isaac, a willing living sacrifice. Romans chapter 12 verse 1. I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Isaac is the Old Testament's foreshadow of a living sacrifice. Though he was bound and laid down, he was not killed, he came down alive. In the same way, Paul in the New Testament urges believers to offer their bodies as a living sacrifice, a willing, intentional surrender of one's life to God. Isaac, a figure who did not struggle or complain but obeyed completely, perfectly shows what it means to be a living sacrifice. Isaac's story reminds us, the height of spiritual life is not how much you achieve, but whose vessel you are willing to become. He didn't fight, yet he inherited Abraham's promise. He didn't resist, yet he climbed the highest altar. He didn't stand out, yet became a key link in the entire legacy of faith. After Mount Moriah, Isaac's identity was completely transformed. Many people think the test ended when Genesis chapter 22 closed, but for Isaac, that moment was just the beginning of his journey. On Mount Moriah, he had died and then lived again. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 19, Abraham figuratively received his son back from the dead. This was a prophecy of resurrection, and the glory that comes from obedience. With silent surrender, he responded to God's unfathomable will. With passive sacrifice, he lived out an active faith. From then on, Isaac inherited the promise, carried on the faith, and became an essential part of God's redemptive plan. If Abraham's faith was upward, then Isaac's obedience was inward. God does not forget the quiet souls who entrust themselves to Him. In the kingdom's records, it's not just prophets, kings, and apostles whose names are written, but also that one who said nothing on Mount Moriah, yet willingly allowed himself to be bound, Isaac. He foreshadowed not only Jesus' suffering, but also the journey where every believer is glorified through obedience. We all long to do great things and be mightily used by God. But sometimes, God calls us to obey, to be quiet, to endure, to lay down on the altar He has prepared, just like Isaac. You don't have to shine or perform. You just have to be part of His plan, obedient to the end, faithful to the end. In your silence and surrender, God will reveal His name, Yahweh Yire, the Lord will provide.